Thank you. Anyway, calls meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Matt Conant,
Present.
Bruce Johnson,
Here.
Todd Kimmelshoe, Bo Shepherd, Mark Boomgarden,
Here.
Wade Kirchner,
Here.
Charlie Hoppin, Gary Marlar, Lack Vergog, Mike Morris,
Here.
Chris Schmidl.
Here.
Or which prior policy direction had been given to staff that required only routine action of the board. The chair will advise the audience that the matters will be adopted in one total motion. However, the board may, at its option or upon request of members of the public, consider any item separately.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Lockyer and I guess Todd. And a second. Okay, all in favor? We don't need a motion.
No.
We can do a vote, roll call. We need a vote, voice vote. Right. Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Motion passed unanimously. Presentation, discussion of action items.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to just open it up and I'll turn it over to Seth Wurzel to make the presentation. So this is our annual budget. Seth's going to get into a lot of detail about the budget. This is a two-step process. So for this month, it's informational and allows us to post for a public hearing in June, and we'll take it back to the board in June for adoption of the budget. So I guess with that said, I'm just going to turn it over to you, Seth, to get into the details about our budget.
Thank you, Michael. Seth Wurzel, Agency Budget Manager. So just really quickly, what we're going over today is the process. I'll show the reason for the budget and a high-level overview of expenditures and revenues, review what work we have going on through 2026, and then our recommendation and answer any questions or comments. So as Michael mentioned, it is a two-step approval process. We follow the same rules that the county follows. They preliminarily approve the budget, provide a notice published in the paper, and then set a hearing for June 14th. And then June 14th, we conduct that public hearing, receive any public comment, and consider approval. So for the budget, essentially what you have before you today is a fiscal year ending 2021 through ending 2026. The reason that we are including 2021, we're just presenting the budget with the actual expenditures from fiscal year 22, beginning fiscal year 21, and then providing a budget that amends the current year 22-23 to conform to the actuals, basically reconciling what we spent to date, shifting budget a little bit further forward into 22-23 and 23-24. And then for 24-25 and 25-26, these are new budgets. Our current approved budget does not go through 2026. It ends in 2024. 2023, 2024. So June 2024, this coming fiscal year, if we didn't adopt this budget, that would be it. We've always adopted this approach of a longer term planning horizon. In the beginning, while we were implementing the Feather River West Levee project, we were presenting the budget on a 5-year time horizon. We kind of shifted that down to 3 years for the last few. And then now we're going back to a 5-year planning horizon to try to push out to 26, get us closer to where we're going through to be implementing additional work with the Sutter Bypass East Levee and Tudor flood risk reduction projects. So I'm presenting those together and trying to align through 21, 22 so that we have a good baseline so you can see the change from the current approved budget to the proposed budget. So our again, the reason that we're presenting this is to kind of show additional detail into the budget and update and show adjustments to projects and programs. So at a high level, this presents our budget comparison. So starting in fiscal year 2021, 22, we had about 18.9 million in the bank. That was our working capital position. The total revenues, we previously had about 61 million. When you extend it the additional 2 years and make adjustments, we're about 78 million. The total expenditures are about 38 million. Extending the additional 2 years adds about 45.5 million of expenses, up to 45.2 million, adding about 7.1 million for those additional 2 years. Our bond debt service, just adding the 2 years, totals 27.3 million. So an additional, about 11 million over those additional 2 years. This presents our expenditure summary. So this is a detail of that change in expenditures from 33.1 million to 45.2, just kind of working our way down. And if there's any questions on any of these numbers, I have additional slides for each line item on this budget if you want to understand some breakdown of the budgeted expenses by type for each of the programs. But this lists all the programs that are reflected in the budget. The agency operations, just simply adding the 2 years, increases our expenditures. The Sutter Basin Flood Risk Management Project, we've had more expenses over the last year. This is all essentially contained within the current fiscal year to close out that project and deal with basically submitting all the credit packages in order to make the USACE project available to be fully closed out. And so there's no additional expenses beyond the current fiscal year. We're just updating that for 22-23. The EIP project, the additional expenditures are associated with project closeout and the basically rolling forward of some expenditures that hadn't been incurred in the prior budget as a result of the closeout of our environmental compliance obligations, funding those in the endowments, and transferring all the right of way, and then associated with cultural related expenses, cultural resource related expenses. The regional planning program extends the budget for an additional phase 4 and phase 5. And essentially the other main expenses, the main increase of kind of moving down is related to the Orville Wildlife Area project, that program. We've gotten a lot additional grants, a few more grants on that project, a lot of funding on that, and so we have got the associated expenditures as part of those grants. And then on the sediment removal, we had previously budgeted and expected to get additional funding, and that didn't come through, so the expenditures have been reduced. That was included in our prior budget, so that's a change in the budget down from 16 to 13 million. That's pretty much the bulk of the expenditure changes from program to program from the prior approved budget and then adding the additional 2 years. On the revenue side, you can see our revenues are going to increase by about 20 million to take into consideration our additional assessments that will come in on an annual basis. We've added, we expect to receive more funding through impact fees and sales of credits to sale of credit that we have on the other side of the river with Reclamation District 784, transferring those credits to developers. We're recognizing the actual amounts that we've processed thus far. The Prop 1E and Prop 68 grants, those are essentially closeout related funding coming in and retention releases. The regional planning program, we had assumed that we would have phases 4, 5, and I think 6, but now there's only a program for phases 4 and 5, so that funding has been reduced accordingly. Primarily, the other increases are related to additional grants for the OWA project that we've received. Some of them were previously assumed and budgeted last year, and so the changes are shown here. Primarily the Wildlife Conservation Board grants and Regional Park Program grants and CDFW grants. We've increased those as well. On the sediment removal project, as I mentioned, we didn't get one of those grants that was budgeted last year, that $2.7 million, so we've removed it from the budget this year. When you net all those changes, it's about a $20 million increase by adding the additional 2 years to the budget. So again, $12 million increase in expenditures relative to what's been previously approved, about $20 million increase in revenues accordingly. Again, I've kind of summarized these already on the prior slide and on the OWA program, DWR and CDFW grants, and Wildlife Conservation Board and CDFW grants to advance permitting and design of Robinson Riffle program and the Thermalito After Bay campground. We still have in the budget sediment removal funding through a phase 2 grant, but that's pending. That's in the budget, but it's not secured yet. And the regional planning grants, phase 4 is secured and phase 5 is expected and included in the budget. And then within the budget from year to year, there are shifting of expenditures between fiscal years based on updated cash flow projections. What you'll see at the end of the budget materials, there's detailed cash flows by program. That's what supports how we slice it up from year to year. So all the detail is included in the budget documents. I wanted to take a minute and just talk quickly about on the operating side, the agency's operating fund. I've mentioned this in the past. What we've done over the years is we've always budgeted the first $750,000 on an annual basis of our assessments to our operating fund to basically pay salaries and consultant support for consultant staff support for the agency. What we do as we let those contracts and have Michael kind of keep his time is we allocate costs as much as we can to projects. That was easy to do under the EIP UFR grant when we were moving forward with the Feather River West Levee project. That was written into the guidelines. A reasonable share of agency operating expenses could be allocated to the project. As we move away and close out that grant, different projects allow different allocations, and different grant programs allow different allocations of overhead. We're going to try to maximize that as much as possible and push expenses away from our operating fund to the capital project to get cost sharing on that. But from a conservative basis, we've allocated all of the expenditures from 22-23 going forward to the operating fund. We get $750,000 revenues. Our operating expenses are around $1.1 million. So over the years, we've been able to build the fund balance in our operating fund. You can see that it's about $6.2 million at the beginning of this fiscal year. But we would expect that fund balance to kind of work its way down as the agency completes projects and winds down the staffing. Ultimately, when we've completed the work, we will not have the same amount of staff support from consultants. We expect that to drop away. In 21-22, we budgeted about $1 million of expenses, but our actual expenses were reduced in that fund by over $600,000 because of our ability to allocate costs. Going forward, we're assuming we're going to be able to do that, but we haven't budgeted it that way. We'll continue to try to allocate those costs as much as we can, but we would expect to see that fund balance move down over time as we allocate less costs. That's the reason why we carry that fund balance from year to year, so that we have that cushion to be able to wind the agency down as we finalize projects. So, with $6 million in our operating fund, we'd be able to operate in that deficit of $400,000 a year for more than a decade. That's the intent of the agency. That's the way our approach has been to budgeting our operating fund. But again, as we have projects going on, we'll try to allocate costs as much as possible. So highlights of the work, what the budget covers: final closeout of Feather River West Levee, advancement of the Tudor flood risk reduction project, design and environmental review, advancement of the Sutter Basin flood risk reduction project, the core project, closing that out, finalizing all of our local sponsor obligations under that program. On the sediment removal project, to the extent that we get additional phase 2 funding, design, construction, and grant admin for those grants that we have and advancing that project. For regional planning, we're the lead agency now. It's shifted back from Three Rivers to our agency, coordinating with the region and leading the grant by issuing the contracts for all the consultants and paying those expenses. For the Feather River West Levee Financing Authority, facilitating the next year of agency administration through June of 2024. That's what the budget reflects, our support to that agency until the end of next fiscal year. For the Old World Wildlife Project, but we'll see a lot of work advancing there on multiple funding agreements, closing those out and continuing our post-project monitoring obligations, advancing the Robinson's Riffle and Boat Ramp Campground projects and implementing those. And then other ongoing obligations, managing our assessment district and debt, advancing the development impact fee program, and pursuing grant funding opportunities for the Sutter Bypass East Levee construction and Tudor flood risk reduction construction. So that's essentially what our budget platform highlights through 2026. So
Questions for Seth?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Seth, I'm looking at this, and Michael, you can probably answer this too. Look, go back that last slide, Seth, if you don't mind. Looks like we're doing a lot of design and trying to figure out where are we going to be moving much dirt at all in the next 3 to 5 years?
Better be.
So the soonest.
It's just kind of a silly question, but I mean, I know it takes a while to get to that point. But.
So we have the 2 levee designs underway. So the soonest we can construct the Tudor flood risk reduction project is in 2025. Okay. And then we're assuming Sutter Basin East Levee will be starting in 2026. The Orville Wildlife Area project, we probably won't break ground there for another 2.5 years or so, and that's assuming we get a funding source for construction. So we have planning, design, and permitting money. So that would push that out to the soonest would be 2026. So we're looking at a couple of years before we start breaking ground on these projects. But that's the time it takes to design and permit, and get all the resource agencies on board.
Yeah, once we get a design and permit, then does it go out to bid? And then we have to get bids for...
Yeah, then we would go out to bid on the projects.
As well, huh?
But we still have to line up construction funding. So we have the money available for the Tudor flood risk reduction project, but we would be looking for cost-sharing partners for Orville Wildlife Area and the Sutter Bypass East Levee.
So we're not really moving much dirt right now.
We're not right now, no. We're moving paper.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, thanks.
chopping wood, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Seth on the budget? Seeing none. Seth, you might as well take on number 4.
Well, so what we need is that the board to preliminary approve the proposed budget as presented. That will, staff will then schedule the notice public hearing for June 14th and make the proposed budget available for public review and inspection, and then bring this item back forward. So we're looking for an action by the board on the.
Do we have a motion for item number 3?
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Mike and, I don't know. Lockyer, okay. Far end down there. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Okay, now number 4. I forgot we had to get approval for that.
Doing great.
Thank you very much for that. So this is looking at our current approved budget. Just giving you a regular monthly financial update. We're sitting on about 22 million of working capital through the end of March, and then about 27.8 estimated to date, reflective of accrued revenues and expenses, which I'll provide a detail on the next slide. Our revenue for 2022-23, we've received through March about 296,000. We estimate, as typical, 750,000 to the operating fund. We'll get that with our next apportionment of property taxes, which will be coming pretty soon here. It takes about a month or so for them to apportion taxes from the April installment. For our capital revenue, 8 million received as of March and about 14 million to date. The difference of 6.43 million when you combine the operating and capital revenue is essentially laid out here on the left side of the slide. So that's 6.4 million showing there. essentially that's made up of payments from the state, about $3.5 million that we're waiting on, and then about $2.8 million of assessment revenues that have been accrued since April. So that we're expecting those to come in. So that's basically the total. We've got a lot of payments in process through all of our grants. Those are listed here on the right. It's just basically a slide with a lot of numbers. So you think we're doing a lot of work. With respect to our expenditures, $4.6 million to date for 22-23, primarily on the OWA project, as I've reported in the past, the flood risk reduction portion of that, and then the rest of the expenditures are shown here, about $500,000 in operating and $660,000 in work to date on the Tudor flood risk reduction, and it's $350,000 on the Wildlife Conservation Board and CDFW funded portions of the OWA project. Our debt service was paid in April, and the next debt service is due in October, $3.8 million. And so, again, what we're working through is just administration of the funding agreements for the state with the state and the Wildlife Conservation Board and CDFW, supporting the agency, FRALIFA, with their administration, post-assessment district approval. We've got the contract and will down in place, coordinating with them. In fact, had a call this morning on that. And then supporting the Feather River West Levy with their services agreement with Sutter Butte. Advancing the regional levy impact fee, we continuing to prepare documents for action by member land use agencies. Michael will address where we are. We've gotten through the city of Gridley and looking to the other member agencies to bring that action forward fairly soon, and then going through the budget process as we just took action on. So that's the end of my monthly financial report. Happy to answer any questions at this time.
Any questions for Seth on the monthly financial report?
Okay, I'll ask one more question. Can you go back a couple slides, Seth? I just want to let you know I wasn't falling asleep. One
Before?
No, one, keep, other way, sorry. Right there, okay. So we spent almost $3 million on the Orville Wildlife Area project.
Right, and that was primarily work from last construction season, so fiscal year 22-23, so the end of last year.
The total cost, though, for the Unit D project was right around $25 million.
Okay.
In total, design, permitting, and construction.
So this is just the portion that we spent fiscal year 22-23. So we're less than a month away from the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, great. That's kind of where I'm thinking. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Seth. Michael, I guess you'll take care of the next part, right?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the program project update for May 2023. Next slide, please. So as Seth alluded to, we're closing out the large Feather River West Levy Project 1. So we are still working with our resource agency partners on the environmental, the VELB mitigation sites. We're turning those sites over to be managed by others. We're getting very close. I keep saying that on a month-to-month basis, but I think we're nearing the end, and Andrea Clark and I are really working together with our consultant team to finalize that process, but we rely on primarily California Department of Fish and Wildlife to approve our documents. So we're hoping to have that done very soon. Cultural resources also, we're very close to finalizing all of those reports. We're currently working with the Enterprise Rancheria on the disposal of artifacts that were collected and analyzed as part of that project. So we're working with the tribe on what to do with those materials per their direction. The O&M manual updates, those have been completed and turned over to the local maintaining agencies. And lastly, on the right-of-way transfer, just last week, I signed off on a bulk of property transfers over to the state, and we have a couple more signings that need to occur, and then those properties will all be transferred over. So we're very close to the end on that process. On Feather River West Levy Project 2, the Tudor Flood Risk Reduction Project, we are in active design, so moving paper, as we just discussed earlier. We're at 65% design level, marching towards a 90%. We're very close to having our secret document, at least the public draft, completed. That's going to go out for public review next Friday on the 19th. And we've scheduled a public meeting on June 7th from 4 to 5 o'clock. It's going to be an online meeting, so anybody from the public or our resource agency partners can attend that meeting and hear about the project and get any questions answered. We'll also be kicking off the 408 process with the Army Corps. So we needed to release that public draft CEQA document along with our 404 and 401 permits, having those submitted, and then that would allow the Central Valley Board to send our encroachment permit application over to the Army Corps for the 408 review process. So all that's happening right now. Next slide, please. Sutter Bypass East Levee repair. So that project is not as far along as Tudor flood risk. We started later, but we are advancing the design. Our engineers have completed data acquisition out in the field, mostly the surveying that was completed. We need to do some additional geotech work. We're working with DWR on, because that is their maintained levee. We're getting some data from them on their pump stations. We have a field meeting scheduled in the next couple weeks. So a lot of work is advancing on that project. On the OWA Robinson's Riffle, I wanted to point out one of the handouts that you have before you is a piece we put together. It's basically like a marketing piece, but it talks about the project, what it's all about, the funding for the project, construction costs, all that information. So we're utilizing that with our state lobbyist, with our potential funding partners, our resource agency partners on the project. So if anybody would like that electronically, let me know. We can send that over to you. We'll put that on our website also. But essentially, we're advancing the planning work on the Orville Wildlife Area Robinson's Riffle project. So that project has started. We're doing hydraulics analysis of different design alternatives. We're going to be scheduling meetings with our stakeholders to receive input on the project and advance it to a preferred alternative. So that's what the planning process is. And that's being funded by DWR through that $1.1 million grant. We also received a $2.1 million grant from CDFW. So once we have a project that is the preferred alternative project, we have the money to now advance design and permitting for that project. So all of our planning, design, and permitting work is funded through these grants. So we're very happy about that. And we'll be actively seeking construction funding for the project. In addition, as part of that overall Orville Wildlife Area project, there's one standalone project that is essentially a no regrets project. We're advancing that through funding from CDFW and the Wildlife Conservation Board. So that is that $6.4 million boat ramp and campground project that's identified there in the second bullet. And that's right at the Thermalito Afterbay. So the Wildlife Conservation Board, at their May 25th board meeting, they'll be awarding that grant to Sbfca. Chris and I will be there in attendance at that meeting. And then we're working with CDFW on the remainder funding that they're advancing on our behalf. So that project will be fully funded, and we'll be advancing that as soon as we have the grant funds in place.
Is there a naming possibility on the?
Did you have someone in mind that you wanted to?
We could call the Bill Connolly boat ramp and campground project.
No, that's combat.
What do you guys?
Combat fishing.
What do you second that?
No,
okay.
that's combat fishing zone.
I think the Connolly campground sounds good.
Okay.
We'll take that under advisement.
Chairman, when the time comes, I'd like to, look into the naming possibilities.
Okay.
All right.
We'll make sure staff keeps us up with that.
On the third bullet, the sediment removal project, we're still looking for a funding partner for that phase 2 work. We have the permits in hand. We're going to have some conversations with the Yuba Water Agency in the next week or so to talk about potentially having some funds from that agency into that project. So more to come on that, but I don't have anything more at this time. And then lastly, on this slide, the regional flood management planning. Seth talked about the round 4 or phase 4 grant is from DWR to Sbfca. It's for $260,000. So it's going to allow us and our regional partners to continue to advance all of our regional projects and agency-specific projects. And I've highlighted the ones that we've been advancing with previous funds, and we'll continue to do so. So I'm in the process now of issuing notices to proceed for this project under the round or phase 4 grant to our consultants. So we're advancing work there. Next slide, please.
Through the chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
I did have a question, Mike, on the last slide.
Sure.
You mentioned the sediment removal at the mouth of the Yuba.
Yes.
Now, we had discussion earlier where, and you mentioned there might be a partnership or tie-in with the Yuba Water Agency. Where is that imaginary line of where their jurisdiction, how far they can go out into the river? I mean, where is that tie-in?
Well, I don't have a specific answer to that question, but both sides of the river benefit from removing that island that has formed right there at the confluence, and it is now getting vegetated,
Right.
and it could become a real environmental issue in the future. So it's to both agencies' advantage to remove that, and that's the conversation I'm having with their general manager right now. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't have a specific line of jurisdiction,
Right.
essentially.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Michael?
Let me just cover this
you're not
slide,
done, I'm
Matt, and then
sorry.
I'll be all done here. City of Orville, what we're calling the orphan levy. So we're working with the city staff on putting together a services agreement and scope of work where Sbfca would help the city advance that project. So we're working closely with their staff, and I'm hoping perhaps next month to be able to take a services agreement back to this board for approval. It may slide into July, but we're advancing that project to see if how this agency can benefit the city of Orville to advance that levee repair project. On the federal project, we are still working with our Army Corps partners to close out that project. The punch list items specific to the Feather Water District facilities that were constructed as part of that project, they still need to be completed satisfactorily. We also need the as-built drawings from that project, so we're working with the Corps to finalize those 2 items. We're also working with the Army Corps to perfect our federal credit, and we're working with the Sbfca, the San Joaquin Agency, or Flood Control Agency, to purchase our credit. So we're still in negotiations with that agency. They're running some cash flow models, some different analyses, and I'm hoping to be able to bring something back to the board in the next month or 2. But we have a meeting scheduled for next Friday to continue that dialogue. So nothing more to report at this time on that item. FEMA remapping, we're getting closer to being able to submit a package to FEMA. We need the Army Corps' as-built drawings from their project to incorporate. But I think that's the last piece of the puzzle. We have everything else pulled together. Chris and his team have done a great job to get this thing ready to submit to FEMA. And we're working with both Sutter County and City of Yuba City staff on that package so that both agencies are aware of it, can provide input into it before we formally submit to FEMA. On the regional development impact fee, we had a real good success with the City of Gridley City Council. They approved the development impact fee on May 1st. We're looking to closely follow that up at the City of Biggs and Butte County coming up in the near future followed by Sutter County, Live Oak, and Yuba City. So we're working with all our agency partners to get that development impact fee in place into their fee packages. And then lastly on this slide is there's also a letter that was put before you. It's a draft at this point in time. We didn't get it until after we posted our agenda, so we wanted a little bit more time to work with LD1. But essentially, it's a letter. It's a reaching out to City of Yuba City and Sutter County, identifying the problems that are occurring within the floodplain, and most notably within some areas of the levees themselves, with I guess unhoused people is the common term now. But we're having a real issue, or Levee District 1's having a real issue trying to manage the facilities out there, and they need help from Sutter County and Yuba City. So our agency council is working with the Levee District 1 council on finalizing the draft letter that's before you. I'll bring that back to the board for approval to be able to sign off on it or to add our agency to that letter. And that's all I'm going to say, but I'd like to see if Charlie wanted to do a quick, add some more information to that if you want to, Charlie.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Thank you, Michael. I kind of initiated the idea of this letter. I mean, we've got people that are starting to burrow into the sides of the levees now. And once they've been there long enough, it gets to be a territorial thing. They think they own the property. We don't have anybody, that we can send down there to route them out. It's going to be up to the sheriff department and the police department. Matt had an idea earlier that I think is a good one. We're going to come up with a contact with Sheriff Barnes and see what he can do. He had somebody that was very functional in dealing with it there that they talked about rotating out, and it just kind of gets to be the same old line of BS, to tell you the truth. But we've got people down there that we can't handle. Before long, Drew's going to start burning the levees, and we're going to start melting blue tarps and bicycles, and it's just not a good deal. And like I said, we have no enforcement authority at all. And my intention, quite honestly, is to put part of the monkey on the back of those of you that are here from the county and those of you that are here from the city to support us on this. Because if we don't, it's just everybody's going to wave their hands and say we're going to get to it next month. And we just don't, we've got to deal with it. That's all I can say.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. Our next board meeting is in June. We do have a closed session here, so what we need to do is, I guess.
Yeah, the staff will.
Yeah.
Before we do that, is there any other questions for Michael before we go to closed session? Seeing none, we'll move into closed session. I guess audience members will leave.
Yeah, so we'll all leave, and then we'll come back in after you guys are done, and then we can officially close out the meeting.
From closed session, nothing to report. Meeting adjourned.